Majestic Alaska. On a map, it is an unimpressive thumbnail on the western edge of Canada. The Mercator projection is how we make our maps, but it does a poor job with relative size. At 663,000 square miles, the northernmost state is 2.5 times the size of Texas. That makes it 1/5 the size of the entire lower 48. East to west, the landmass is 2,500 miles long. That's the distance from Savannah, Georgia to Santa Barbara, California. It's a big state. It's also wild. There are 1.3 people per square mile in Alaska. New York City, in comparison, packs 30,000 people in the same area. Even Texas, which has an awful lot of empty space, has a population density 200 times that of Alaska. So it makes sense that a climate so hostile to machines would boast the highest ratio of pilots and aircraft per capita than any other state, and that by a large margin. There are 6 times as many pilots and 16 times as many aircraft in Alaska on a per capita basis. 82% of communities in Alaska are not connected by a road system. The answer to this isolation is an expansive network of 235 airports. There are also frozen lakes, dirt roads, tundra, anything flat really, for big wheel piston aircraft to land on. If you're an aviation geek, you must be a little in love with Alaska. There's no better playground for a small propeller-driven aircraft. In Alaska, the ancient radials are cobbled together by spit and duct tape, and they're working airplanes. They crisscross the communities, bringing needed supplies by courage and guile. And it's not just the big twins. Cessnas and Pipers and God knows what else are up there, beaten up by time and hammered by the elements. If you want to step back 90 years into aviation's golden era of whipping scarfs, anonymous heroes, and all too common fatalities, Alaska's your place. It wasn't a big Douglas that went down in January of 2008. It was a Cessna single. The sole occupant was making a grocery run from Idjugig to Anchorage, Alaska. Visual conditions prevailed along the route, at least that's what the weather briefer told the pilot prior to the return flight. He also told him, as is common in Alaska, that he might find some snow flurries around elevated terrain. The private pilot had 2,400 hours of aeronautical experience, with 275 coming in the previous 6 months. Personal flight records were not recovered, but one would imagine that the flight to Anchorage represented a route that the pilot was familiar with. There is nothing but dirt roads in Idjugig, and none of them lead out of town. If you need supplies in the dead of winter in the small fishing community, you're either hiking or you're flying. Idjugig's worth the trip if you're a fisherman. Sockeye salmon run up the river from Bristol Bay in July. 30-inch rainbow trout follow in August and September. By January, nearly everything is frozen over. The summer feast of fresh salmon and trout replaced by a 220-mile trek over the hills and across the inlet to Anchorage for an $800 grocery run. Remarkably, the village boasts a Russian Orthodox church with an entry sign in Cyrillic. For a small community made up mostly of Eskimos and Native Americans, this at first blush doesn't make sense. Consider the map, though, and you realize that in the dead of winter, if you're willing to hike a few hundred miles, you can cross the Bering Strait and be in Russia. The plan was to depart Anchorage, traverse mountainous terrain via Lake Clark Pass, and land back in Idjugig. The weather 27 miles southeast of the crash site depicted winds out of the northeast at 13 knots, good visibility with few clouds at 6,500 feet, and a temperature that was just below freezing. It was, as flights in Alaska often are, a VFR leg. IFR in the tundra requires oxygen level altitudes due to the terrain that's pretty much everywhere. Normally aspirated pistons don't go that high. Luckily for the typical bush pilot on a budget, there are plenty of passes to skirt the mountainous terrain. Lake Clark Pass is a common one. It connects Anchorage to the western part of the state. It's 70 miles long. In most places it's also wide. The winds are notorious, so is the turbulence. Alaska's a harsh place. Flying there is not for the faint of heart. The pilot departed Anchorage at 13:28 without incident. At 15:55, the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center received a composite emergency transmitter locator signal in proximity to Tyanek, Alaska. ELTs are installed as a safeguard in the event an aircraft crashes. They are unbelievably important when operating over uninhabited terrain. The devices are triggered when excessive G-forces are detected. ELTs are required to be installed on all U.S. registered aircraft due to a congressional mandate that dates back to 1973. You can always count on Congress to get interested in something once it directly affects them. The congressional mandate was issued following the loss of Congressmen Hale Boggs and Nick Bykick in 1972. The aircraft they were in disappeared between Anchorage and Juneau, Alaska. It was never found. ELTs do not provide location data. They simply transmit over discrete frequency, allowing responding personnel to track them via direction finders. Overflying aircraft reported hearing the ELT on air-to-air frequency 121.5. At 1602, rescue satellites passed overhead. They did not detect the signal at that time. Nevertheless, Alaska Rescue notified state troopers at 1618 regarding the potential crash. At 1702, they requested Civil Air Patrol aircraft to overfly the area searching for the potential site. CAP aircraft were airborne inside of an hour. The search did not last long. 6 minutes after taking off, CAP pilots reported that they could not cross the Cook Inlet due to insufficient cloud ceiling height. Not long after, Alaska Rescue contacted the 212th Rescue Squadron. An hour after this request, a friend of the pilot's family reported that the aircraft was overdue. By 1930, a 212th Squadron helicopter was in the area searching for the aircraft. They located the accident site in 1953, 4 hours after the first ELT signal had been received. At the crash site, fuel was found in the tanks, the engine was partially buried in the ground, and the cockpit was extensively damaged. The aircraft had impacted in a 50-degree nose-down attitude, crumpling and coming to rest against a large birch tree. Remarkably, the pilot was alive when first responders arrived. He was transported to a hospital in Anchorage. There is no happy ending to this tale. He would not survive. All things considered, the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center did their job. The pilot was ultimately located less than an hour after he had been declared missing by a family friend. It could have been earlier had the weather not intervened to prevent Civil Air Patrol aircraft from accessing the airspace over the accident site. Life can be fickle. We take survival for granted, but sometimes it hinges on the slimmest of margins. The engine had been overhauled 1,500 hours prior to the accident flight. Investigators were not able to find any evidence of pre-impact engine anomalies. There was fuel on board. Toxicological tests on the pilot did not indicate any alcohol or drug use. The cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries. None of this stopped the NTSB from issuing a probable cause, with an emphasis on the word probable. They blamed the crash on the pilot's failure to maintain adequate airspeed while maneuvering and prevent a stall. They apparently decided that the 50-degree nose-down angle at impact was indicative of a stall spin. It's not a bad guess. Though the pilot detailed his route of flight to a pre-flight weather briefer, he did not file a flight plan. It's easy to imagine that phone service in Idjugig might not be all that reliable. The runway, after all, is bigger than the town. The population in 2020 was 68. The per capita income of the village is $13,172. That's $21,750 per household. In few parts of the world would those demographics go along with aircraft ownership, but such is life in Provincial Alaska.